Hello, today is St George's Day. Now cry God for Harry, for England and St George, and vote Leave. Right, now yesterday we had the head of a sovereign state basically threatening the people of Great Britain with dire consequences if they did what he didn't want. And shamefully, our Prime Minister stood shoulder to shoulder with him when he did it. I think that Winston Churchill would probably have the Prime Minister who stood shoulder to shoulder with someone who was threatening us put against a wall. But that's my opinion. Now, the whole thing was a farce because basically he used the word queue instead of the word line, which they'd say, and like it's not like you stand in it as if there's a queue of people waiting to have trade agreements made. The whole thing was rather quite bizarre and very poorly written by somebody in Downing Street. It can't be taken seriously because, let's face it, President Obama would be saying what he would believe is in the interests of the United States. What would be in the interests of the United States would be if we remained in the European Union, signed up to TTIP, and so large American companies could buy huge sections of our NHS. Interestingly, in America, with the Republicans, you end up being ruled and dominated by big business. And with the Democrats, you end up being ruled and dominated by big government. Now, I don't particularly like either. I'm against being ruled by big business or big government. And with the European Union, you are ruled by both big business and big government. Now, the Remain camp indulged in Project Fear has been making some rather bonkers economic predictions. I mean, we've actually had the Chancellor of the Exchequer give us a prediction of how our economy would do until 2030 if we left the European Union. And I must say that this is the most ridiculous statement said by a Chancellor since Gordon Brown broke the cycle of boom and bust. It is absolutely impossible to look that far ahead to make a prediction. Now, the thing, somebody on BBC Question Time, that bastion of left-wing nuttiness, disguised as a proper debate, actually stated that we would be so many trillion better off and could council get rid of our debt, and our deficit would be, yeah. But it's nobody actually mentions that if we left the European Union, with the money we would save, we could actually stop austerity, and so that is so we would be able to invest in public services rather than make cuts to public services. And it would be a good thing if we had money to invest, because the deficit wouldn't be a problem if we weren't sending all of our taxpayers' money, or a huge chunk of it, to the EU SSR. Right, now, I would just like to talk about this leaflet here. Okay? Got that? I'd just like to talk about this briefly. Thank you. Now basically, this claims that we have a stronger economy in the European Union. Now, it says that 44% of everything we sell abroad goes to the EU. Now, basically, we can work out by this that 56% of what we sell abroad goes outside the EU. So we are actually trading more with those outside the European Union than in the European Union. So if you look at that, and the whole economic kind of argument about we should stay in because it's where all our trade is, falls apart. And like 3 million UK jobs are linked to exports to the EU. I mean, this is based on the idea that on leaving they will refuse to trade with us at all, which they won't refuse to trade with us. And it talks about the cost of living going up, as if when we left, cows would start producing less milk and bees would start producing less honey, and, well, basically you're just not going to have the same yield of wheat in the fields if we left the EU. I mean, and workers are going to be a bit miserable, so productivity in our manufacturing industry would decline if we left the EU. It's kind of, you know, I mean, as if, you know, I mean, this is the only way the cost of living could go up, so it's just nonsense. Oh dear. And then basically it gets on to controlling immigration and securing our borders, which there's this bit about controlling immigration and securing our borders. It's the biggest laugh going. While we are a member of the European Union, we have no control on unskilled workers migrating to this country. Basically, unskilled workers can anywhere in the EU can come here and take our unskilled workers' jobs. Meanwhile, because we have to make room for all the unskilled workers, we can't let skilled workers in that we are short of, because we have to let in all the unskilled workers. So basically, you end up with a huge skills gap due to lots of unskilled workers being around. You also end up with low wages because there is a never-ending supply of cheap labour. And this is why business, when they talk about business, they mean big corporations, etc. They don't mean small to medium-sized businesses. Basically, the European Union is about big business and big government, as I said. And they lobby the commissioners to get what they want, and all the regulations are designed to help the big businesses, so the medium and smaller businesses suffer by all the red tape designed to help the big businesses. And one of the things the big businesses like is low wage costs, and a constant endless supply of unskilled labour from Eastern Europe keeps wages down and keeps people having to claim tax credits and the like instead of being paid a decent wage. And so, I mean, and we have no control over this whatsoever while we are a member of the European Union. So, I mean, this whole thing about controlling immigration and securing our borders is absolute nonsense. It's just not true. It's just a load of... I mean, we have absolutely no control over our world. And, like, I mean, criminals and all sorts of people have got into this country, and we have not been told that they have criminal records in our country. So, I mean, like, it's just rubbish. It's all it is to help big businesses save money by having cheap labour. And right now, it's just a price not worth paying, is it, really? I mean, the economic arguments for remaining don't make sense, and like everything else is just absolute squid. So we're better off out. But even, you know, even if the economic argument for staying in was correct, and the most ridiculous prediction made by Project Fear was right, I would still be voting to leave. I mean, if they were right, though they're not, they're wrong, I would still vote to leave. Because basically, I would rather be not so well off and have a democratic right to choose the people who make the decisions on my behalf, rather than be better off and have no say in the decisions made that affect my life. And that is the fact. The thing is, it's not about sovereignty, it's about democracy. And while we are members of the EU, our democracy is being destroyed. And as someone who believes in democracy, I cannot support our continued membership of the EU. Now, and there will never be any democracy in the European Union. They are ideologically opposed to democracy. And it's quite clear. When the French voted in a referendum against the European Constitution, and the Dutch went and voted against the European Constitution, what those people did, they showed contempt for the democratic view of the people by changing the name of the European Constitution to the Lisbon Treaty and let it through without a vote being cast. And our sovereignty was cast away by the man who became a Prime Minister without a vote being cast, And so this is the contempt they had. And now, I mean, I still believed it was possible for Europe to be reformed and democratised, the EU to have some form of democracy at that point. But then along came, and then later on they decided to overthrow the democratically elected government of Greece and put in their own people to do their bidding. They then did the same to Italy and allowed people to do their bidding. So at that point it was obvious that they have an absolute disdain for democracy. Just recently, the Dutch voted on about EU expansion and a trade deal with Ukraine. They voted against it, and the EU basically said their opinion is irrelevant. Now, I think we should vote leave, and I would not be surprised if after we voted to leave, they would tell us that our referendum result is irrelevant, because this is the kind of contempt they have for democracy. I find it absolutely fascinating that people who call themselves One Nation conservatives in the Disraelian tradition are just so pro-EU. I really can't understand it, because if you follow Disraeli's philosophy to its conclusion, you end up with universal suffrage. If you follow the ideology that governs the EU to its conclusion, you end up with no suffrage at all. I mean, basically, the decisions are being made by unelected bureaucrats in Brussels who have a contempt for democracy, as I have demonstrated, and they are taking more and more power away from national parliament, so there won't be a point to have a national parliament. They don't want democracy. They have a contempt for it. And for that reason, we need to vote out. I want people who make decisions that affect my life to have accountability via the ballot box. I want them democratically elected. Basically, they can try and kid us with the European Parliament when all they can do is talk about it and rubber stamp everything the Commission's done and are unable to legislate. I want the people who are able to legislate to have democratic accountability. While being a member of the EU, those who they are those who legislate on our behalf who are not democratically accountable. And they have no intention of being democratically accountable, as their record of contempt towards democracy shows. And as a result, even if all the economic arguments of doom and gloom, if we left, were correct, which they are not, I would still be voting to leave the European Union. For a start, I think another good thing about us leaving the European Union is we can give the Greeks hope and hopefully give them the courage to get their democracy back instead of the undemocratic imposed poverty and deprivation and hurt that is being inflicted on the Greek people by the people in Brussels who have an absolute contempt for democracy and don't care how much it hurts the normal people of the continent as long as their ideological project continues. They just aren't interested in the opinions of the people. They just want a federalist United States of Europe, which will not be democratic. It is the new USSR. That is what the European Union has become. And basically, people can be in poverty, disempowered, whatever, and that is of no concern to the political elite who are running the European Union, because the only thing they're bothered about is their dream of a federal Europe. But eventually the European Union will go the same way as the Holy Roman Empire. Nothing lasts forever. Another argument that the in-crowd come out with, they claim that the EU has kept peace in Europe and it's good to keep peace. Now, I mean, now basically the EU like us in because that they can sit under our nuclear deterrent free of charge. Basically, now what they've been doing with the Ukraine, they're ever with the expansion ever nearer Russia, and what they're doing in the Ukraine is basically poking the Russian bear with a stick. And poking the Russian bear with a stick probably isn't the best way to keep peace. So, no, the European Union is not good for keeping peace. On the contrary, I mean, poking the Russian bear with a stick is not a good idea. And then peace and security when they want to let Turkey in, so we have a border with Daesh. The whole thing doesn't make sense. But as I said, the democracy deficit, the deficit in democracy that exists in the European Union is a good enough reason to get out, because we want accountable politicians and basically who we can vote in or out, rather than have decisions made for us by people who appoint each other. Anyway, I think I've said all that needs to be said about that, haven't I? Okay.